Welcome back to the Jupiter Live. I am your host, Tom Franklin. And today we have on my very close friend, and I'm very proud to say my very close friend, Daniel Cohoon from Magical Journey Podcast, as well as the Facebook page. Go over there and give him some love. Uh, Today is my good buddy Paul from Paranormal Among birthday. Happy birthday, Paul. May you and your family enjoy this festive day. If you keep finding yourself coming back to the live, I have Jupiter podcast every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern time. If you keep coming back to the show, do me a favor, hit the like, subscribe, leave a little comment. Tell me what you think about the show. You can also find me on Rumble. You can also find me on Patreon. Not Patreon. What is it called? The big one that Joe Rogan is on. You guys will tell me. I always forget it because I never hardly use it myself. But if you're a person who enjoys listening to podcasts going down the road, you can go ahead and download it from there. You guys know the name of the website. I'm sure Daniel will hook me up because he couldn't remember it yesterday himself very well. You can also become a member, get yourself some extra episodes before they release, and you get yourself a nice little screen background personally made by me. There's also a merch at the bottom of the page if you want to get yourself a shirt, a hat, a coffee mug. Do me a favor, go down there, check it out, and buy yourself something, and it'll help support the show and create a better product for you guys. So, with all that out of the way, let's please have a heartfelt welcome for my friend to the Jupiter podcast, Mr. Daniel Cohoon.
Oh, I got you all choked up there.
I just got caught in my thoughts. I was like, what do I got to do next? What's the next button I got to push? That's what, and it's a little bit, wow, it is crazy out right. The trees are blowing sideways, man. You think I moved my truck because you know that big that big river that goes down in front of my street right there. I think
Oh
you've
yeah,
probably
yeah,
seen
yeah.
videos. If I don't move my truck, dude, like the first time I didn't know because it was the dry season when I
Mhm.
moved here, and it was in the middle of the street. People knocked on my doors, and they were like, "Hey, your truck's going down the street." And I looked out the window, and it was like I
Wow.
don't know, 30 feet. It was almost in the intersection. Yeah, same day, a dude rode past on his bike, and you can see it's hitting the telephone pole and
Oh
splashing
my
up like
gosh.
15 feet in the air, and he just hits it with his bike and just gets washed down, loses all his tools. It's a wild place, man. Dude, thanks so much for coming on, Daniel. Do me a favor. You've been on many times. We were on yesterday. We also have every 2 weeks. And it's called oh my God, the Forum of the Forbidden. It's me, Daniel Cohoon, and our good buddy Jim Powell from Fisher Spam's Night Watch podcast. Go over there and do me a favor and give that one a like and subscribe. Uh, do me a favor, buddy. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and once again, where we can find you.
Okay, so my name is Daniel Cohoon. There's way more to tell about me that I really want to go into right this minute, but because part of that feeds into uh, the tonight's show. But you can find me on Magical Journey on YouTube and on Facebook and on Spotify. That's the word you could remember before Spotify.
Spotify. Don't you have a show on tomorrow? Your shows are on Fridays live. Who do you have coming on tomorrow, Daniel?
I was just going to say that. Tomorrow night
Oh,
I have I've got it down today, oddly.
oh,
Tomorrow
all
night
right,
I
okay.
have Fire Lotus from TikTok fame and also on here. Fire Lotus the Witch, who will be discussing Appalachian and folk magic, and that is at 7 p.m. tomorrow
Cool.
evening.
And that's cool. So where did you meet? Where did you meet this guest that you have coming up? This is interesting. Where'd you meet that person?
On TikTok of all places, I really just started like running into several of these people that I know from online on TikTok when my because my brand actually started over there, and
Oh,
Fire Lotus
okay.
and I became friends from Fire Lotus and I became friends after a period of time over there, and then I just started kind of following him all over the place because I find Appalachian and folk managed rather interesting, and so yeah, that's kind of how we started communicating, and now like
Awesome.
we have conversations all the time. Really.
That's cool. So you're gonna have them on, have this person on tomorrow, and you guys are gonna get into folk magic. That sounds very interesting. Okay, dude, you're on the show. I asked you, I don't know, about a month ago, and I was like, "Hey, dude, what you got? What else can you? What else can we talk about?" I'd love to have you back on because I know you're trying to get this YouTube channel off the ground. You're very good at what you do. You actually invited me on as your first guest, and once again, thank you for that gracious invitation. I appreciate it very much. Um, but you were like, hey, let's talk about the I Am movement and my visit to Mount Shasta back in 2007. And I was like, okay, I don't know what, I know Mount Shasta. I know what it's a little bit about it, but I don't know what the I Am movement is. And I would love to see what you have for us, buddy.
So just to tie it together, both of those things are connected. And uh, just briefly before I start talking about Mount Shasta, the I am movement is a little bit deceptive because most people think of I am as talking about the person of you. But in this case, the I am movement is really about the name of God based on um, Moses' experience with God with the burning bush when Moses asked God, who shall I tell the people of Israel who sent me? And God said, I am that I am. And so the I am movement is based around what they believe and teach the name of God as being I am. So based on what he said to Moses. So that's where the name of the movement comes from. It's not about self-centeredness or anything like that for those that are not familiar with the movement. Um, So, and the I am movement is one of many that use and believe that Mount Shasta is a sacred site.
Okay.
So, I had always been fascinated with Mount Shasta because of my
Well,
interest in.
where is Mount Shasta located, if you don't mind?
So, Mount Shasta is actually part of. It is in California. It is near the redwoods there. I forget exactly the exact location. Is part of the Trinity um, national forest or national park. I do know that. Um, and it is, I really honestly cannot remember geography all of a sudden. Um, it is near, like, we're talking like central-ish California there. So it's down a little ways. I believe you can get there through the 101 or connect to the 101 to get there. Uh, for those of you that are familiar with the 101 in California, it's an amazing place to drive through. But it is very near the redwoods. I do remember that about the location. Mount Shasta is also the a potentially active volcano, which is very interesting too, especially as we start to get into this conversation on the on Mount Shasta.
Okay.
It'll be interesting to remember that as we kind of bask in some people's truths about what the mountain is. So when I went there in 2007, I had already been had experience with the I am movement and a few other things. I knew that there was a lot of spiritual energy surrounding Mount Shasta. There was a lot of myth and allure, a lot of reports of really bizarre phenomena happening there,
Okay.
missing people, UFOs, cryptids, the more strange if it doesn't get stranger than that. The more strange tales are of uh, giant people living in the mountain and tales of seeing strange creatures that supposedly or strange people that lived inside the mountain. So I was always fascinated with Mount Shasta when I once I heard about it, and when I finally got the opportunity, I didn't even know I was going. It was actually part of a surprise 4 day trip,
Oh, that's
and
cool.
yeah, yeah. Um, my friend there at the time gave me a 4-day tour of some of the best places to go to in between Oregon and California. So as we began to go in that direction, though, I looked out and I realized that we were getting really close because you can see Shasta for a ways. And I was like, in my mind, I kept thinking, oh my goodness, we are heading toward Mount Shasta. Now, here's where things start getting interesting, though, because I could tell it was Mount Shasta, but I could not see the peak because the cloud cover was covering the peak that day, and
Okay.
it was like massively cloudy everywhere, and I was kind of disappointed about that because I really just wanted to see the whole mountain. So as we got closer and closer and closer, I got more and more discouraged that the clouds were never going to go away. So I began doing something called reverse the tide, which is a call used to kind of reverse those things which you do not want near you, or to reverse situations, to reverse karma, that kind of thing. So I was like, okay, I'm going to try to do a reverse the tide on the weather and see if it works. And so I'm staying there and I'm like trying to do this under my
Okay.
breath, and we're driving closer and closer to the mountain. And as we start to get near the mountain, right at the peak itself, the clouds started kind of moving away from the mountain just enough to be able to see really blue sky. And I got just really carried away with doing the reverse the tide faster and faster and faster and focusing on my intention. And as that happened, the clouds just started parting more and more and more. And my friend
Okay.
looked over at me and he goes, "What are you do? What are you over there doing?" And I kept going and didn't stop, didn't answer the question. And by the time we got there, there was not a cloud in the sky. All of the clouds had
Whoa. And this is
and I was like,
some type of ritual. What are you doing exactly? Excuse me. Could you break down what is it that you're doing? Reversing the tide. What does that mean?
so reverse the tide is something called a decree, which is done as a form of chant or prayer and is done while visualizing that which you want to happen. And it's done
Okay.
from usually from a relatively comfortable pace going up and up and up until you get to an accelerated pace. The accelerated vocalization usually goes with an accelerated release or vibration of energy. Decree work is something that is used a lot with the I am movement and a few other organizations and movements. So, and that goes back to, I forget the exact text in the scripture, but there is a verse in the Bible that says, "Decree a thing, and it shall be given to you." And so they use that particular verse as a response to doing decrees. So with that, um, that's kind of what that was all about, was doing decrees for uh, the reversal of cloud sky. So we got there. It had been raining in that area. The ground was wet. It was March. It was like that was the year that Easter fell in March. And so it was in the valley itself, it was around 69 to 70 degrees that day. A little bit on the cool side in a way because it had been raining, it was cloudy, and then the clouds kind of dispersed, but hadn't warmed it up yet.
That's about for our foreign listeners, 69 to 70 is about 19 to 20 degrees Celsius.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, which is relatively cool. I've experienced that too. I had to reverse. I went to a place called what's it called? Pitztal. Tal is valley, and Pitz is the name of the valley. It's in Austria.
Yeah.
It's a valley you get into, and it goes all the way back, and you can take this train that's it's like almost a 45-degree angle, and it goes up the mountain. It's minute trip to the top of the
Oh,
mountain. You can go skiing and snowboarding up there. It's very cool. And this particular trip, me and my ex-wife went there, and during the day at the bottom it was about 17, 20 degrees Celsius, about 65, 70. But on top of the mountain, it's still 32, 30 degrees up there. So you can ski during the day and then go all the way down to the bottom. And these mountains are, oh my Lord, they're 2,500 meters, whatever that is in feet, times three. You guys go ahead and do the math. 8,000 feet, something like that. And so you can go up, ski during the day, and then come down at night. And in the evening, we were barbecuing. So it's always such a cool thing to be around mountains. Although I do find them to be, especially in the Alps, a bit suffocating. Like
pretty.
it's so close together. It's not like the Rockies where they're a little more open, or it's like this is a different type of formation or it's a different type of earth. I don't know what they call it, earth geo movement that does it. It's more of like a lift, which makes the Rockies, and these are crashing European and African plates, and they're just so pointy, and it can be
Mm,
quite suffocating. And they were telling us like there was times where the snow comes and they have to bring in like food with helicopters and stuff because to get out of the valley is about a 35-minute trip, and it's all the way down right next to the Italy border. So it's just such an interesting world to be in when you're around mountains as well.
yeah, it definitely is. And you know, Mount Shasta is part of the Cascade Range. That's what I was trying to remember exactly. And its evolution is a little over 14,000 feet. It's like at its peak is 14,179 feet. So it's kind of up there. Uh, yeah, it's extremely uh, that whole area is just an amazing energy around it.
Yeah, I
And
was
that
looking it
was
up. It's very beautiful. It's very
it's
beautiful. It says it's in
extremely beautiful.
Siskiyou County, California, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, very beautiful up there. Cool. It's close. Looks like it's close to Reading up that way.
Yeah, it is. Which is interesting because Reading is a whole story in itself for another day, really,
Okay.
because Reading is the home of Bethel Church, which is a Latter-day Rain church, as they call it. They're very big on signs and wonders. They have video of like it raining inside the church during worship
Really?
service, feathers falling from the sky. I mean, there's literally rain coming down from the ceiling all over the church in one of the videos.
Oh
They've
wow,
had
you got to
several.
post that to our pages, dude. I got to see that.
Yeah, there's several um several manifestations that they've caught on film there in Reading. But so here's the thing about my experience, my very first experience with Mount Shasta. I've been to some very energetic places, places that um, are extremely powerful and extremely strong, extremely reverent areas to go into. So it's nothing new to me to walk into these areas. But I began to like just in the car, in the car itself, in the truck, I began to just like feel this immense amount of energy coming off the mountain.
Wow.
And
Okay.
we got outside the truck, and I didn't walk, but it just like maybe about I took maybe 4 or 5 steps, and I literally hit the ground on my knees. And I was like, wow, just crying. Of course, my friend's totally freaking out.
Wow.
He's like, "Oh my God, are you okay?" I was like, "Give me a minute." And it took me a bit to just like get to the point where I could breathe again. I mean, even like now, it's a lot to talk about. But
Yeah, it's like I imagine it's more like an adjusting to the power. It's like you have to change your inner resonance to kind of meet the environment you're in. If I
yeah,
may so boldly say so.
it was literally like, and I want to be a little bit on the side of caution when I say this most of the time, but it was literally the holiest place I've ever stepped foot on. And I was across the street and at the visitors center. I wasn't even near the mountain. That like right at it. I wasn't like
It's saying
it
saying a
was
lot, people
like
coming
we
from you.
yeah,
That's saying a lot.
it was amazing. And so all of this became testimony to me in a way that something about this mountain is blessed and touched somehow. Now, the fact that it's become the center of the New Age movement and so forth, obviously, one of the things I want to say about that is when it comes to powers that be, everything has two different sides to it in this planetary alignment. So you have, and I don't want to like sound like, but a lot of these organizations that are starting to, that have and have been starting more and more to gravitate to Shasta over the years are kind of on the side of hokey in a sense. A lot of them, they really don't add up, like their claims are not valid. So,
Okay,
when I
yeah, there's
talk
a
of,
lot of that in the New Age
yeah,
movement. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of like, I am so. I have now found myself, and everyone look at me, kind of thing, which can be.
yeah,
It makes me. It makes not my. It doesn't make me angry, but it makes me very. It makes me not like it. I just don't enjoy it whatsoever. It turns me off from it, which may be also within that movement,
right.
which is probably kind of, childish in my behalf. But probably within that movement, there were people who were genuine, but
Mhm.
there's also a lot of charlatans and hucksters in it too, as well. So be careful, especially
Right.
the ladies. Be careful.
Right. Well, and even at that, I mean, as I begin to talk a little bit more about the I am movement in a bit, um, you'll find that, with great power comes great responsibility too. And even with organizations that start out legitimate and, on a particular level, they can eventually fall into a different direction and not necessarily a great direction either.
Yeah, kind of like
So,
a hierarchical. That word that word hierarchical, like top down, do what I say, don't question anything
right.
type movement, which has happened to a lot of things, good and bad movements.
Well, and some of them go on to develop something called the fortress mentality, and I'll talk about that too,
Okay,
because that did happen at a certain point with the bigger group of the I am movement that was in existence at that time.
okay,
So when we left the Mount Shasta area, I was actually quite. This sounds bad. I was actually kind of excited to get away from there because it was almost too much. I was
okay.
not prepared. Like it was something I was already always waiting to be at. I enjoyed my time there. I was not prepared for what I walked into because this was something very new to me at the time. And I was just not, I wasn't ready. And so probably because I wasn't even prepared for it. Had I been prepared for it, I probably would have not reacted as strongly to it. But yeah, so it was kind of a train wreck. And on the way leaving out of there, I was just getting downloads on top of that. It was like waves and waves and waves of stuff coming at me at once, and I was like, okay, we got to like keep driving here, just keep going. I don't
Yeah.
like
there is a
get
pedal on the
on.
there's a pedal
Yeah,
on the right side there. Push it.
yeah, yeah. And that's actually was like where we went down and we went into the redwoods and we explored around there for a little bit,
Well,
and
that
then
must have been awesome. That's something that's on my bucket list for sure. The redwoods.
oh gosh, it was after being at Mount Shasta, the redwoods were like, so I have a strange connection with trees, and we've talked about this before. Um, the redwoods were being very calming and very healing because they knew that they could sense that I was overwhelmed. So at one point, I just leaned up against one for a few minutes. I was there breathing, trying to ground again. And so that was a very pleasant experience and very very appreciated after being right in front of all that energy. Uh, so that was my experience with Mount Shasta, and I was like completely obsessed with it for a while.
You didn't
By
go
the
back
time we
after
got,
that day. You didn't go back after
I,
that day.
I had not got to go back yet.
Right.
It's
You
still
had
a
to make a
goal.
pilgrimage. You have to make a pilgrimage up there, buddy. I know for you, it's something that you need to do again.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely something I need to do again. I want to make sure that I've got at least one other person with me when I do that, though, because
Okay.
not only is it a trip that's like a couple of thousand miles from here, but it's just not really a good idea to travel by yourself anymore. But not only that, but because of the area, I really don't want to try to experience going there alone.
Okay.
Because there is a lot of activity in that area, and there have also people that have been, even on missing 411. There have been some stories about
Wow.
missing
There too.
on that. Yeah, which is
Oh
very
wow.
interesting because the one
That,
case that was on missing 411, there's not like at the summit of Mount Shasta, there is not like there's not trees and so forth. Okay, going up going up that incline, there's a lot of loose rocks. It's very dangerous to walk there, but you have a straight shot visually for a very long way. And
oh wow. That's interesting.
the one experience, the guy literally just disappeared. Um, they've never found him. They've never found a trace of him. They searched like a lot of people when they slip and fall, they'll roll down the mountain, and but they can still be found because no there's no vegetation there to
Right. The
get
tree
lost
cover
in.
or anything. Right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So he literally just vanished. Uh, and his friends were in clear view of him. They saw were watching him, and then they lost track of him, and then nobody saw him after that. But so there's a lot of that that goes on. But, and for a long time, like I connected with the I am movement uh, in the 19 what was it, 80, yeah, somewhere in there. It was in the 80s. I forget that. But I was part of that experience for a bit, uh, and during that time, I heard the history of the I am movement, which actually started by uh, Godfrey Ray King, or Guy Ballard, as he's also known, and his partner Lotus. Um, no
Okay.
connection to Fire Lotus the Witch. Um, Back in the 1930s in Chicago. Now, Godfrey Ray King went to Mount Shasta on a hike at one point, and while he was there, he had an experience where he met this very unique stranger on the mountain who introduced himself as Saint Germain. And
As Saint Germain.
yes, yes,
Oh,
yeah,
that's interesting because I know who that is.
yes. Well,
That's interesting.
there are volumes of books that led up that came from these meetings with Saint Germain with Guy Ballard, or Godfrey Ray King, as he's also and they're called the I am discourses. The very first one talks in particular, and that's the only one I've actually read of that yet, and I still never gotten completely full through it yet because there's a lot. It's very detailed. Um, he talks about his meeting with Saint Germain, and he talks about Saint Germain taking him inside Mount Shasta to
Okay.
a city. And the problem with the disbelief of this book is the amount of detail he goes into. Like he goes into, you have to, he would have had to have been one of the most creative geniuses of all time to think all this up. Because there's like he goes into detail of the type of material things were, how things felt, how things smelled, how things like the colors in all the rooms of these displays, uh, the lighting. There's a lot of going back and forth in different times of history during this encounter and so forth. And there's a whole lot of discussion that makes you go, there's no way one person came up with this story if this is a story. Just the
Okay.
detail. But this whole book, talks about his experience with Saint Germain at Mount Shasta. And like I said, it goes into quite a bit of detail about the underground city. Uh, it's a city of extremely high technology. Some of this technology goes back to the time of Atlantis and Lemuria. And he talked a lot about Atlantis and Lemuria in his discourses. So there's a lot of things that go on with this particular book and this particular story. So that was what the I am movement really started out with was the I am discourses and Guy Ballard and Lotus. Then in 1950, Mark Prophet, and yes, that was actually his legal name. Uh, he came in contact with the I am movement, and eventually he became the founder of Summit Lighthouse, which was the early years of what would become Church Universal and Triumph. Now, Mark Prophet was doing tours, doing lectures on the Ascended Masters and the I Am movement. And the Ascended Masters are basically uh, kind of an upscale version of saints. If you
Okay.
will. They they are literally like Saint Mary is one of the Ascended Masters. Mary Magdalene is one of the Ascended Masters. There are yeah. Um, hey Arlie, I just noticed you in the room. The
Okay. Do you know this person?
that
This the person you're talking about? Catherine Moore, 52. Could you please add CC? What's CC? Add CC.
closed
Don't know what that
caption.
is. Ah, closed. How do you add closed captions?
I'm not sure to be honest.
I don't know how you do that. I don't know if I can do that
I'm
from
not
here. I don't know how to do that. Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, I'm
Yeah, I'm
so
not really
sorry.
sure how to do it when the live is actually started. I know there's a way to do it. I'm just not sure how.
I'd have to look into that. Go ahead, keep talking, see if I can find
Yeah.
anything in here to do that.
So with
Sure.
Mark, yeah, with Mark going into he did some tours into the New England area, and that's where he met a young lady who was actually raised in the Church of Christian Science, which was an organization started by Mary Baker Eddy. It was thought of as a positive thought church. They believed in healing. They did not believe in doctors. A lot of things that go into that. Mary Baker Eddy uh, believed that we were literally built to live forever, and that disease was actually an illusion. Oddly enough, she
Okay.
did pass eventually. She did finally pass though, so I guess the illusion
Who'd have thunk it? Who'd have thunk that?
yeah, right. But even now though, the Christian Science Monitor, which is part of that church, is one of the most reputable newspapers in the entire country. So the church still exists. So Elizabeth grew up in that church though, and she was very interested in a lot of stuff uh, related around that. Elizabeth had epilepsy, and she was very much as a child um, trying to find ways of overcoming that. And it was through the church that she tried to do that. Well, as she progressed into getting ready to go to college, her mom had a book of all things on Saint Germain in their library. And Elizabeth found the book and she went up to her mom and she goes, "Mom, this book." And she started talking about it. And her mother was like, said to her, "I'm glad you finally found that book. I was waiting for you to find it and hoping you would find it. And now you can take it with you to college." So she began
Whoa.
reading about, yeah. So she began reading this book. And then all of a sudden there was like this connection where Mark just happened to be in town where she was at. She went to one of his lectures because she found out about it. And she eventually, somehow, out of that first meeting, met Mark. They connected and eventually were married. And they formed the the union of it was a marriage, um, and they became known as the messengers of the ascended master. Supposedly,
Okay.
according to the story that Elizabeth tells, and she has a book. There was a book that was written by her and one of her daughters that talks about preparing for her mission. So the story is in there too. According to her story, Elmoria actually came to her and told her that he was preparing her to do a great mission and that her job was to go and teach people about the ascended masters and about the ability of decreeing and prayer and meditation and those sorts of things. It was a whole, he was preparing her to be Mark's companion to bring to light the I Am movement to the world. Mark was older than Elizabeth. He eventually passed. They had 4 or 5 children. Um, I think Mark passed in the 1970s, maybe very early 80s. I think it was actually the 70s that he passed. Elizabeth took over the church. It was in California at the time in a place called Camelot. It was an old campus that they had converted into a church campus.
Okay.
And she kind of split the two organizations into two different things. She connected Summit Lighthouse with Church Universal and Triumphant. Summit Lighthouse would become the publication sector of Summit of Church Universal and Triumphant. And they were teaching there on the campus. They were doing what they called Summit University, which was teaching the teachings of the ascended masters there. Decrees were part of their work as well. And we've talked about decrees already.
Mm-hmm.
They were very active. The church began to grow rapidly at that time. Elizabeth was doing a lot of stomps and so forth, as she called it, which were tours. There were focuses for the church in um, Atlanta, Chicago, New York. They had moved. Eventually, they moved the church from Camelot in California to Livingston, Montana. There at the Royal Teton Ranch. So they were right in the Tetons. Also, right beside, and this comes into play very hardcore in a little bit in the story. They were right across, literally bumping up next to the park there, which I believe is Yosemite Park there near the Royal Tetons.
Excuse
So
me. Wow. The
bless
first time
you.
I've sneezed. The first time I sneezed, I popped my cherry on my life. It's the first time I've sneezed on a podcast. Phew.
Yay!
Right.
Right.
Do 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 do. It's part of
Wow.
my charm. Phew. Wow. I didn't really sneeze. Oof.
Wow. So with that, the the lectures and so forth, and becoming part of it, like growing into getting the area as Royal Tetons um, developed. They moved the church campus there. They had a ranch there where they were growing their own food. Uh, they were doing a lot of retreats, as they called them there, where people would come for long weekends and have uh, basically like just hours and hours and hours of lectures and so forth there. And there was just there was school there. There was a community essentially there.
Okay.
The In the I am movement, they never would disclose their numbers, their membership numbers, but the I am movement became extremely large globally there as things begin to progress.
If, if you had to
To
estimate, what would you think it would be?
It was in the millions. It was literally in the
Wow.
millions at one point. At one point, it was in probably one or two at least. At least there there was uh, numerous books put out by Mark and Elizabeth both, and they also had publications like the Pearls of Wisdom, which was um, those were weekly publications that came out that were dictations of the ascended masters through the prophets, which is an immense amount of literature, immense amount of information coming out all the time. Their videos, some of the videos are still online here on YouTube. Actually, they have quite a few of them, especially from the 80s and so of Elizabeth um, teaching about the Ascended Masters and the I Am movement.
Okay.
So we're gonna fast forward it to the time of the 90s, which became like Elizabeth had developed quite a following. Her followers were calling her Guru Ma at this point. Uh, she was
Okay.
she was very much known. Uh, Nightline, Oprah Winfrey, all of the big shows of that time had done interviews with either her or one of her children. Aaron Prophet was her kind of was the only one of her children that was actually like really involved in the church, and she was kind of Elizabeth's protege. Many people thought she was going to take over for Elizabeth whenever Guru Ma stepped down. Uh, However, that did not happen. And actually, Elizabeth or Erin has a book called Prophet's Daughters that talks a lot about her experience with her mother. And um, I've talked to Erin a couple of times over the phone after I read
Really?
her book. Yeah, after I read her
Wow.
book, I got in touch with her on Facebook, and then we eventually talked on the phone because her book really struck a chord with me. Uh, so with that, the 90s rolled around, and people had begun to spend an enormous amount of time and money uh, there at the ranch. People had begun to move to the ranch. The ranch had developed quite a community there. Somewhere along the line, Elizabeth got this dictation. And let me back up for a second. There were several things that put Elizabeth in the spotlight throughout time. Um, she has some very controversial theories about where HIV and AIDS came from. She believed that they were uh, actually engineered in a laboratory with a split between bovine. I think it was some type of leukemia. I really want to say it's bovine leukemia, and or it could be that the leukemia came from sheep.
Wow.
One came from sheep and one came from the cow, and the other one was I think that was actually the the sheep was the a brain. type cancer that came from sheep. Both of these things kind of play into um, and are given credence through some of the opportunistic diseases that were actually very prevalent with HIV and AIDS at that time. So there was enough of truth to that theory that people began to take notice of what she was teaching about that. And there were some other dictations that she got along the way that were very interesting and appeared to be very accurate. So
Okay.
literally her online, or her what would be online now, her television presence, her radio presence became more prevalent all the time. They eventually put out a uh, public television broadcast that was called what was it called? It was the higher conscious revolution of the higher conscious or something. I know there was revolution and higher consciousness in there, where she would give lectures online, or on TV rather, have online uh, from the Ascended Masters. So that was kind of interesting that she actually got a lot of airplay through that time period, right
Okay.
alongside right alongside Oral Roberts and people in mainstream religious community. So
Well, Robert Tilton. I remember Robert Tilton the most. That's the one I
yeah,
remember growing up.
yeah. So somewhere along the line, though, Elizabeth began to get very vocal about what she called the international communist capitalist conspiracy. And
So
then,
I
yeah,
triple C.
yeah. And then she would, and they literally, that's exactly what they called it. They began calling it the
Hey, you guys.
ICCC,
Yeah, you have some marketing ideas. I'm your guy.
right? Right.
It was
Um,
just so right there. Couldn't keep myself back from it.
yeah,
I triple C. Come on, guys.
yeah, yeah. So, hey, it's kind of scary how that popped up. Maybe the messengers were talking to you. Um,
No, they are not talking to me, man. I turned off. I have no cell signal today.
there are actually decrees in their decree book decreeing against the international capitalist communist conspiracy. And with that,
It's interesting though. International
yeah,
capitalist communist conspiracy. That's a
yeah,
very people are conspiring to turn capitalism into communism. Is that what I'm supposed to be glean from that?
essentially,
Okay.
yeah.
I got to be
And
honest with you. From what I've known, what I've been listening to, and what's been going on, it's not far fetched. Possible.
right, right. Well, and that's the thing of it. It's like the more I begin to listen to her teachings and reading, like there's one of the books that she put out was um, Saint Germain's Prophecies for the New Millennium, and there was
Count Saint Germain. This guy is a count. It's kind of like Count
yeah,
Chocula, Count Dracula, and the dude from Sesame Street. But
oh yeah,
if you
yeah,
don't know who Saint Germain is, look into this character. It speaks many languages. He's been seen in many eras and many times
hmm
stretching over, I don't know, was it 1,000 years, 2,000 years, something like that?
yeah, yeah.
Something crazy like that. This guy, if this person's, this person who was a part of IM who had seen him on the mountain and introduced himself as Saint Germain, that is such an interesting development. I can't get out of my head. Good
Saint
cereal.
Germain is a major character in the church too. So with that, they believe that Jesus was the ascended master of the Piscean age, and that Saint
Right?
Germain is the ascended master of the Aquarian age. So they believe that
Didn't we just enter
in
the
the
Aquarian age?
yeah, yeah, supposedly. We've been entering the Aquarian
Okay.
age for a few decades now, according to everybody.
Oh, all right.
So we just keep going toward the Aquarian age. Saint Germain is also the master of the violet flame, and the seventh ray. So he's also connected from that with transmutation and purification. And there's a lot of things that they taught about that. Um, Along with his prophecies for the new millennium, there were also several books that she wrote along those lines. The Forbidden Mysteries of Enoch. There was another book or two on fallen angels and so forth. All of it talking about more and more talking about uh, very revelation type uh, apocalyptic things uh, coming into play. And as this was building, there was also something that came up called that started developing where more and more and more the church was slowly moving into something called the fortress mentality,
Okay.
where
Right. Okay. This is what you were about to get into, the fortress mentality. Right.
right, where everybody was getting tighter and tighter. There were more people starting to move to the compound. There were more people like very focused on Guru Ma. As a matter of fact, they even quit calling her anything but Guru Ma within the church itself. Um, Elizabeth began teaching that she was the embodiment of the Universal Mother. Um, there were several times where uh, people mistook that as saying that she was the embodiment of the Virgin Mary. A lot of things started happening where more and more there was this kind of personality cult mentality starting to develop, and more they were tightening the reins on people, dictating what colors of clothes can be worn and can't be worn, what
Oh
foods to
God, here we
eat,
go.
what music
Here we
could
go.
and could not be listened to. There was a whole list of like thou shalt nots that began to creep into the teaching.
Just to be completely honest, people always, when they think of Jim Jones, they always think of what happened in what's it called, Suriname? It's not Suriname, it's that area. Um, that it's not Suriname, that's the part of France, but the other places next to it. It's the two other countries next to it. They always think about what happened down there in
Right.
1978 with the
With
drinking of the
Jonestown.
flavor aid. It's not
Yeah.
Kool Aid, it's flavor aid. They
Right.
always get that wrong.
Right.
What happened in Jonestown? I think it was called the People's Church, if I remember right.
Guyana.
I think that's what it
It
was.
was in Guyana.
French Guyana. Thank you, brother. Thank you. That was brother and buddy together. Buddy. I think that's the word I said. Uh, it started out in San Francisco. He was actually a very nice and helpful person to the underprivileged African American community in that area in San Francisco at the time. In the I would say in the early to mid 70s, he was a very well respected person. They said, okay, the world's going to end. They moved to French Guyana, and they started going crazy. I listened to a whole
Hmm.
podcast about, I think it's a last podcast on the left, and they were like basically like mentally torturing these people towards the end. So like a lot of these movements, for some reason, it always leads to the guys wanting all the women, and it always leads to some person at the top. But the very interesting thing about the one you're talking about is that this one is a matriarchal, which is an interesting.
Hmm.
It's less prevalent within these cult like situations. I can't think of the word. I'm trying to be funny and smart, but I can't all the time. That's a very interesting development, to be honest
Hmm.
with you.
Well, and she began teaching how this was the time where the Universal Mother was to be brought into awareness of mankind, that the, if you will, the feminine aspect of deity was to be the new focus. We've had our time with Father God. Now it's time to embrace Mother God as well. And so the divine feminine was played up highly within the church at that time.
Okay.
A lot of emphasis to rosaries, to the Virgin Mary. Uh, a lot of times there was There was this focus toward, and they even began to at times they would do have decree sessions and so forth, where they would actually sing bonjans to Guru Monk.
What's a
And
bonjon?
so it's a sacred Hindu song or chant singing.
Okay.
Um, so like one of the more common ones is Om Namah Shivaya, which is um, sung by several people in chant and decree. So as we begin to see this moment, this big moment of escalation, uh, and coincidentally, one of the things that really shocked people and threw people off was one of her predictions was there were going to be mass ascensions at the ranch. This sent the first shockwave out because
Oh, that's getting weird now. That's
people were
getting weird
beginning
now.
to worry that maybe something was going on there. Maybe there was preparation for something um, darker than what we were expecting. However, that never really came to pass. She did say, though, that because of the dispensation we were in, there would be mass ascensions within the church there in Livingston, Montana. More and more the community started becoming around them, started becoming very antsy, very concerned. It was almost like the same experience that was happening with the Rajneesh community in Oregon, where the town around them was very concerned about their actions. Um,
I think I've seen this one. I think I seen there was. I think there was a documentary on one of those. One of those things you can. I think it might have been Netflix. Yeah, that was a very interesting
Wild
one as
Wild
well.
Country, Wild Wild Country is
Yes,
probably the one you're talking about. That was the
yes,
Rajneesh
I watched that
documentary.
one. I watched that one.
Yeah.
Okay,
There were things very similar to that going on in the Livingston, Montana area around the Teton Ranch. People's concerns began to grow. And here's where things started to escalate greatly and become like crescendo into this, for lack of a better word, shite show. It was just a nightmare. So Elizabeth got this revelation, this dictation from the masters, that there was going to be a nuclear conflict between Russia and the United States. Now
okay.
this was around 1998, 99 when this was starting to be, and she believed that it was going to come in, it was something that was imminent. It was going to happen soon. So there was this massive call for them to start building bomb shelters at the ranch. Now, here's where things start to become to light. People were not aware that they were starting to go into what was called the shelter cycle until some of the members were getting caught transporting guns across state line. Boom, boom. So yeah, they were doing the pew pews across state line and got caught doing that, and it became a whole story. Now all of a sudden people want to know why are you putting these types of things into your compound? Uh, the concern grew, escalation grew, and then another thing happened, of course, that really sparked a lot of interest. Oil from one of those containers leaked into the park and got into the water system there.
Wow.
So
Okay.
now you have the local authorities and the federal authorities raising questions as to why do we have oil coming from your property. And it was discovered that the oil was coming from a stockpile within the shelter. So then everybody was starting to wonder, hey, what are they going to do? They've got all these
Sorry, so freaky Hebrew. So it's not cooking oil. No, they weren't.
yeah,
It's
no,
it's not. No, not even though I think that would also mess with the water supply, but I think in this case it's more maybe crude oil or motor oil or something
yeah,
like this.
yeah,
Very
it
funny.
was a type of machine oil. It was definitely machine oil.
It
Uh,
was Taco Tuesday and things went awry.
One might think that. So with this, it kind of led to a really big, and at this point she was also doing the media circuit, warning people on television that she had had this dictation, this revelation of what they were calling a doomsday prophecy. And so people were really starting to panic. You know,
Okay.
first we had the revelation of mass dissensions at the ranch. Then we had people getting arrested for taking illegal contraband over the state lines. Now we're talking about we've got bomb shelters, and we got people patrolling the ranch with things strapped to their back, um, armed and ready to go. So we have a lot of things going on at once that lead people. And here's where it gets even better. She had
Okay.
started convincing people, doctors and lawyers all over the world, to sell off everything and move to the ranch because of and then this immediate threat of nuclear war between the superpowers. So now you also had all this influx of people coming from
Well,
all over the
I need
world.
this chick to help me sell some of my merchandise.
Right, right,
You need this mushroom shirt because Russia. Okay. Real
right,
selfless plug there, but it's still that's great.
right.
But that's the thing. That's what people don't realize. A lot of the times is that we, as a human species, always tend to make bad decisions under the influence of fear, and that's where they want you to be. They want you to be in the five senses, and they want you to be afraid, because when you're afraid, then the cerebral cortex falls away, then the mammalian brain falls away, and it takes you down to the reptilian brain. And when you're in the reptilian brain, there's only reproduce, feed, and destroy. And when those things come in, you can't make any type of like cognitive. You have I wouldn't say you can't, but you have a much more difficult time of making any like positive cognitive
Yep,
choices, and
yep,
that needs to be said. So remember that when you're watching the news, ladies and gentlemen. Don't watch
yeah.
the Eye of Jupiter and watch Magical Journey and watch Fisher Spams My Watch and all my other friends out there. You go and watch those instead and get the real news, because Daniel is dropping bombs to take away from Sam Tripoli.
Right. So now let me give you guys a little bit of what was going on regionally throughout, like from especially from Washington State all the way through um, into Montana and so forth. And this is only speculation, but around this time period, there was a large number of people in the greater Northwest area of the country and down near Montana and so forth. There were several people in this corridor door of the country that were developing different kinds of cancers. There was like some parts of that area where things were becoming
Yeah.
more and more prevalent.
And then Aaron Brockovich showed up and she was like, "Hey."
Well, there is a theory. There's actually a theory that the government was experimenting with some kind of device or something that was causing all these things to happen, where more and more people were developing a lot of serious illnesses. Now, Elizabeth had already been spending her entire life dealing with seizure disorder and epilepsy. So that experience started happening more and more with her during this time. And eventually she got in touch with doctors, and Elizabeth discovered that she had the early symptoms of Alzheimer's. Now, a lot of
Okay.
people probably think, okay, so was all of this stuff with the whole thing with the great conflict and the end of the world and all this, was all this a result of that? But the general theory of people that are still members of the church, and you have to realize at the time that the shelter cycle came into being, and she actually pinpointed a date eventually for the nuclear disaster and had people in the shelters that night. decreeing and trying to do their thing to push back the inevitable war that was about to take place. When the prophecy failed, a lot of people began to fall away from the church. The church immediately started seeing residual tear down. And then, whenever Elizabeth announced that she was stepping down from leadership, the deterioration developed rapidly after that. So
Okay.
those people that were left, that were in the core of the church, begin to speculate that what really happened was that somehow she was attacked by the government with this weaponry. And the reason for that being that they did not want people knowing the things that she was talking about with the international capitalist communist conspiracy, the potential
Wow.
for conflict between Russia and the United States. There was a lot of things that she was talking about that was very anti-government, even though she was very pro-American. They were very patriotic. But this particular world system was what she was really talking about. The current state of world government at the time.
Yeah,
And
I
they,
mean, honestly, even today at this particular
yeah,
moment,
yeah,
it's probably the worst it's been since that time. It's kind of fitting what you're talking about right now.
right. And this is where this church is still in existence and still holding what little bit of ground it has, is that more and more people are starting to realize that some of what Guru Ma taught before she started developing this fortress mentality and before things started getting really crazy and creepy, um, a lot of the stuff that she was teaching just before that is really coming into play now. Um, I never got a response back from her, but I even sent Erin an email recently asking her, do you think where we are now is actually a continuation of the revelation from the 90s? Do you believe that what Guru Ma saw during the 90s is something that's potentially related to our situation now, especially with all the back and forth between the United States and Russia? Um, I still have not heard from. She's kind of dropped off the face. Like, she's not responding to things. She's not online anymore. Much as so, I'm not sure what's going on with Erin at this point.
Wow.
But I do know that in the eventually in the early 2000s, it was around 2009, um, Guru Ma did pass, as the church says she made her ascension, um, and she succumbed to Alzheimer's. I do know that they had a very lengthy funeral service, which has many hours of it on YouTube as well. Um, Many hours of it is split into three segments.
Mhm.
So there was a lot of things that happened with that. Like I said, the church is still in existence as Summit Lighthouse again. It's no longer um, Church Universal and Triumphant, but it is called Summit Lighthouse. They have broken down the amount of books that they used to offer have been broken down into mini books now, like almost pocket-sized books of some of the more key publications that came out at the time. So they have more condensed versions of the thicker, older books that came out. They're still producing the Pearls of Wisdom. They have a video library and an audio library that they offer. Um, they still do decree sessions, and they have several other things for people who are part of the Keepers of the Flame fraternity. So
So there's still
they're
there's still some of an active an active community is what you're saying.
they are still an active
Okay.
community. They have toned down some of the thou shalt nots and so forth. They're not as like you see members online in colors that used to be the forbidden colors to wear and so forth. So
Okay.
they've relaxed in some ways, uh, but the
All
I
right.
am movement is still existing. What I really, the take from this that I really wanted to kind of bring to attention is, and this is where I still believe that there was inklings of truth within the Church Universal in Triumph, is that Elizabeth's teachings on the worldwide conspiracy, uh, the connection between the United States and the USSR in playing their parts in the worldwide conspiracy, what we now call, the deep state and so forth. There were different terms for it back then.
Mm-hmm.
There
You're
was,
talking my language now, dude. So just be careful.
right.
This is where Tom gets a little excited and his nose hair starts standing up or going straight. This is. I spoke about myself in the third person. I'm going to try to make sure that doesn't happen again.
The book, you can still find a copy of the original publication on, I think it's thriftbooks.com, called The Forbidden Mysteries of Enoch, which talk about the Book of Enoch.
Oh, yeah. I just went
Um,
through. I had a live episode with Neil about that a couple weeks ago. Interesting.
she was promoting the Book of Enoch before it was cool. This is the original book. And she goes, it's very detailed. So she was promoting the Book of Enoch in all of its glory way before it was cool to read the Book of Enoch. So, or books of Enoch. There's actually three of them.
Books of Enoch, you better
So
said, yeah.
yeah. So and it's actually the Forbidden Mysteries of Enoch, Fallen Angels and the Origins of Evil is the full title of it, by Elizabeth Clare Prophet.
All
So
right. So what's your takeaway on the whole situation? Well, you were trying to wrap it up in a bow, and I sidetracked you.
right. So even though at some point toward the end, the church itself kind of developed into a very cult mentality, very, very much a fortress mentality, and it kind of turned into just a horrible, horrible show, um, where Guru Ma became their main focus, and they kind of got away from being a little bit more down to earth, so to say, that they were to start with. Prior to all that, there's enough of things that Guru Ma was teaching that really pertain to and are relevant today, that still make learning a little bit about the teachings, the things that she taught at that time period, very relevant to where we are now in history. And
Fair enough.
I wouldn't say like I wouldn't encourage you to get like become a keeper of the flame and be part of the fraternity and all that, because there's still the potential for a little cultism there, I feel like. But overall, there's enough of truth hidden within the teachings of the Ascended Masters and Elizabeth Clare Prophet that is very relevant for today. And so,
Cool.
and if and I encourage people to do some investigating into the history and the story of Elizabeth Clare Prophet, Mark Prophet, and the Church Universal and Triumphant, especially the point of where she began to move into the media spotlight up until the time of the shelter cycle and her exiting the church as leadership. Because I think you'll find that there's some interesting kind of things that make you go, was she actually, did somebody push a button and force her into the place where she eventually became uh, not the leader of the church? Was there something that perhaps
Happens
that
all the
there
time.
was
Just
manipulation
happened
because maybe
recently.
she was, yeah,
Yeah, it just happened recently. I'm
manipulation.
not.
Yeah.
Manipulation is everywhere, dude. I'm not trying to get political, but when you have, I don't normally like to, but when you have someone who is now on a certain side, who is now the person who's to be voted and hasn't received any type of like support, there, there's some backwater channels going on. There's always in every type of, we're supposed to have checks and balances for that. Supposed first of all, but
Hmm.
they apparently don't like following. They don't like following the papers and the founding documents of the country. Anyhow, um, yeah, dude. Let me get one more question before we get up out of here, dude. Do you think there's giants under a mountain underneath a Mount Shasta? What do you think is down there, dude? If you had to guess.
So Mount Shasta, um, according to my understanding, is one of the spiritual focuses on the planet. Do I believe that the Ascended Masters may have a underground complex of some type there, or something have an object? I believe it's very possible that there's probably something there. Uh, do I know exactly the source of it? I do not. Do I feel called to try to figure it out at some point, or to try to connect with it? I do. Um,
Okay,
yeah, and
interesting.
at some point, uh, I may explore that a lot more, because I kind of I touch on that with an air caution at this point,
Mhm. Yeah, but
just
you're
because.
doing quite a few things. You're doing a kind of. We're not gonna discuss them. That's all between you and me and our close friendship circle. There's some things that you're getting into, that we're all like be cautious and all that. But you seem to be on this magical journey. And I'm
Right.
good, dude. Don't worry about it. I'm a professional. And one more time, dude, I want to thank you so much for coming on. Could you please, one more time, tell people where they can find you?
So my brand is
Such a
Magical Journey. You can find me on Facebook and the Facebook group Magical Journey, on YouTube under the same name, and on Spotify and css.com for the audio of my podcast.
The RSS feed. I think it's
Yeah,
RSS.
yeah.
Yes, I think you started. You gotta show me how to do that one. I don't know how to do that one. That way you can actually help me with some things. I helped you a little bit on the StreamYard side. You can help me on the RSS side. Daniel's such a wealth of knowledge, such a wonderful individual, such a loving person. Every word you speak is with such great love and such great respect for everyone involved. We had up to 16 people in the chats tonight, dude. They were very interested in your
Wow.
topic. Here you go. Here's Magical Journeys. Here's Magical Journeys book. We had you guys over in the chat have been killing it tonight. A lot of thank you. A little twisted, fascinating show. I will. Hey, thanks. When you go over there, you do me a favor. Leave a little comment. Leave me a like. You can also go over and check out Daniel, I, and Jim Powell of Fisher Spans Night Watch. We every 2 weeks we do a like a roundtable discussion. The first one was about what was it, hidden history. The second one
Yeah.
was about portals, and I think next week is going to be the symbolisms and music, and where they actually want your mind to go. So don't forget to go ahead and check that out. The first one dropped on Jim's channel. The second one was on Daniel's channel. And next week, not next week, but the week after, we haven't decided if it's going to be Tuesday or Thursday. If you miss it, you can catch it on the recap. And we rotated that way everyone gets a share of the wealth and the love. Go over and subscribe to each one of those channels. Also, it's Paranormal Paul's birthday, so go over
Yay.
to the
Happy
Paranormal
birthday.
Among Us right now. You can leave. You can leave. You can go ahead and leave. It's okay. We love you guys. And go over there and give him some love, and go over at least like one of his shows, and in the very least subscribe to his channel. And we're trying to help him out. He's a fantastic dude. He's always been very helpful for me and all my close friends in this podcast. I guess more or less we're kind of developing a community here, which is cool. What do you think about that, Daniel? A podcast community where we all help each
I
other.
do. Yeah. I do believe that is definitely what we're working on right now. And it's very helpful. I'm learning a lot. A lot.
Yeah, dude, it's always cool because every one of us has like a different little angle in which we discussed this last night. You're more of the pagan Christian. I'm more of the New Ages, whatever you want to call me. Daniel's telling me that I'm special. I don't know what that means so far. We'll get there eventually. And then you have Jim. He goes from a very Christian angle, and then Paul. He's also a Christian as well, but he has a very cool angle. He also does a lot of he goes and does a lot of paranormal investigations. He's starting to get into that with Blondes and Booze, Bigfoot, Michigan Rob. You can go out at the bottom of the description, check all those links and everything. And Daniel, as always, dude, you killed it. You always prepared, and you always bring a lot of thunder when you come on the channel. Thanks everyone for joining, and I'm going to leave it. Instead of me doing a separate bow out, I'm going to keep us both on here. Let me go to my brand and say it together with me. All right, we'll do it together this time. You know how I leave each one of these outro. That's the intro. Here's the outro video. All right, you are watching The Eye of Jupiter, and remember, we are the eye.
We are the eye.
And we are the where. Are aware. There's a little lag. We'll work on it next time. Love you, brother.